She smiled when they warned about apex predators, then asked which ones taste best. The containment ring on Latch Station Kel-9 was venting decompression alarms in 3 overlapping frequencies when Warden Prime Vantic Ux planted all 4 of his limbs against the deck plating and roared an order that nobody heard over the klaxons. His chitin, normally a deep, official blue, the blue of a being who has seen every kind of trouble a border checkpoint can produce, had gone a hot, blistering orange from crown to thorax, the color his species plating turned only when something with teeth was loose on his station. Behind him, a 2-ton lattice-hided quarmoth, all coiled muscle and razor spinal plates, thrashed against a containment net thin enough that you could see the stars glittering through it, its 4 secondary jaws unhinging and rehinging with a wet, rhythmic clatter that echoed off the ring's curved walls, and 6 junior wardens were doing the very reasonable thing of backing away from it as fast as their exoskeletons would carry them. The quarmoth's hide caught the emergency lighting in long, oily streaks of violet and black, the color of a bruise that hadn't decided how badly it wanted to hurt yet, and every few seconds its spinal plates flared outward in a wide, threat display fan, each one edged fine enough to open an exoskeleton the way a can opener handles tin. It was, by the Concord's own registry, a Class 8, not even the worst thing that regularly came through Kel-9 checkpoint, just a mid-tier nightmare, the kind of apex specimen that got a full containment team and a mandatory incident report rather than a full planetary evacuation order. This was, by any Concord metric, a normal Tuesday. Latch Station Kel-9 sat at the exact seam where Concord space stopped being polite and started being wild. A customs waypoint built into the hollowed-out husk of a dead moon, its corridors ringed in containment mesh and regeneration bays, its entire reason for existing built around one sacred, blood-soaked principle. Nothing designated Apex class crosses into inhabited systems without a permit, an escort, and a great deal of paperwork. The Concord had spent 11,000 cycles compiling the Apex Biothreat Registry, a document longer than most species' entire legal codes, and every entry in it existed because something, somewhere, had eaten a diplomat. Apex class wasn't a suggestion. It was a scar the whole galaxy shared. The registry itself ran 12 classes deep, from the merely unpleasant Class 1 nuisance fauna up through the Class 12 designations reserved for the handful of species so catastrophic that the Concord's official policy was simply do not go there, ever, for any reason, and every class in between represented some world's worst day, codified into law by beings who had personally buried the evidence. Every checkpoint in Concord space ran the same drill: declare, screen, quarantine, escort. No exceptions. No professional courtesy. A warden who let something Apex-rated slip through unlogged didn't get a reprimand. They got a memorial plaque because, statistically, something on that scale of dangerous rarely left witnesses behind to discipline. Warden Prime Ux had personally overseen 412 Apex intake procedures in his career, and he still flinched every single time because flinching was correct. Flinching kept your arms attached to your body. The wardens who stopped flinching were the ones the Regeneration Bay staff talked about in hushed, professional tones. The quarmoth was subdued 11 minutes later, sedative darts, a second net, one warden with a dislocated shoulder plate that would need a full cycle in the regen tank. And Ux allowed himself exactly 4 seconds of stillness before his comm crackled with the next item on the manifest. "Warden Prime," said the intake clerk, a reedy voice buzzing through the comm like a trapped insect. "Processing Lane 9 has a flag. Species designation, human. First contact civilian, provisional observer status, routine apex fauna handling declaration." Ux's mandibles clicked twice, an old habit, the sound his species made when they were bored, because a civilian declaration form was the least interesting thing that could happen on the station. Standard screening. Route her through. Copy Warden Prime. He should have known, looking back, that nothing that started with a quarmoth loose in the containment ring was going to end with a boring form. The processing atrium of Latch Station Kel-9 was the kind of room designed to make you afraid before you'd done anything wrong. The walls were lined with warning placards in 11 Concord scripts, each one bearing a full-body illustration of a different apex-class predator. The horn-plated ghast of Veron Prime, the burrowing eel swarm of the Ith Wastes, the six-eyed ceiling stalker that had ended an entire survey team on Colony World Theta 6, with more. Mortality statistics stamped beneath each one in bold, unambiguous Concord numerals. The message of the room was simple. These things exist. They will kill you. Declare accordingly. Human civilian designation HU-92, per her intake file, was 53 standard years old, 1.64 meters tall, soft around the middle in the specific way of a species that did most of its labor with tools rather than teeth. And she was currently leaning against the intake counter with a paper cup of something brown and steaming, reading the warning placards the way most beings read a restaurant menu they weren't very hungry for. Her name was Carol Deakins. She wore a cardigan the color of a manila folder, sensible shoes that had clearly walked through mud more than once, and an expression of mild, unbothered patience that every single warden in the atrium found somehow more unsettling than the quarmoth had been, though none of them could have told you why. "You are human civilian Carol Deakins," Uck said, arriving at the counter with his plating still faintly orange at the edges from the morning's excitement. "Occupation, per your declaration, nuisance wildlife relocation specialist, Pasco County Division, planet designation Earth." "That's me," Carol said, and took a sip of her coffee. "You understand the purpose of this screening. The Concord requires all civilian personnel entering inhabited space to declare any direct physical contact with apex biothreat class fauna. This is not a formality. This is the single most enforced statute on this station. Beings have been quarantined for lesser omissions." Ux's plating flickered, a warning stripe of deep red crossing his thorax, the color reserved for describing the seriousness of the rule itself. "Do you understand the gravity of what you are being asked?" Carol glanced up at the warning placard nearest her, the horn-plated ghast, teeth like construction equipment, a mortality statistic reading * engagement survival rate. 6% stamped underneath in stark red Concord script, tilted her head at it the way you'd look at a photo of somebody's exotic vacation, and smiled. "Any of these good eating?" she asked. Ux's mandibles stopped clicking entirely, which for a V-Horon was the physiological equivalent of the room going silent. Processing Alcove 7 was where the station routed anything that made a warden's plating change color twice in one conversation, which was, as a rule, not civilian wildlife declarations. It was a small, sterile room with a single reinforced table, better suited to interrogating smugglers than processing a form, but Ux had walked Carol Deakins there himself, because something in the back of his exoskeleton, the old instinct, the one bred into every V-Horon since the first apex encounter their species ever survived, told him this was not, in fact, a boring form. "I'm going to ask you again," Ux said, seating himself across from her, 4 hands folded with a precision that suggested he did not usually need to compose himself before a civilian intake. "Have you ever made direct physical contact with an apex-class predator?" "Sure," Carol said. "This morning, actually." "This *morning*? "Well, before I left for the shuttle terminal, there was a gator in Mrs. Petrenko's pool again, 3rd time this month. I don't think she's latching her back gate." Ux's plating cycled through 3 shades of alarmed orange in the span of a single sentence. "A gator," he repeated. "You are describing an aquatic saurian apex predator." "An alligator, yeah. About 9 feet. Sweet old thing, honestly, just wanted to sunbathe on the pool steps." "And your response to this encounter was?" "I got a pillowcase and a push broom out of my truck, walked it down toward the canal, and gave it a little tap on the tail so it knew which way to go. Carol said this the way a person describes returning a shopping cart. Took maybe 10 minutes. Ux's mandibles clicked so hard and so fast that a junior warden monitoring from the observation pane outside the alcove actually flinched. You understand what you are describing is a direct, unarmored, single-being engagement with a Class 9 aquatic apex predator using domestic textiles. I mean, I had the broom too. That does not. Ux stopped, recalibrated, and his plating settled into a color his species didn't have a clean translation for, somewhere between disbelief and the specific horror of watching someone casually survive something that should not be survivable. This is not standard civilian behavior. It's Tuesday behavior where I'm from, Carol said. It escalated from there, the way these things do, in the particular rhythm of a person who has never once realized that her ordinary life sounds, to literally anyone else in the galaxy, like a horror story told from the wrong side of the teeth. There was also the bear, Carol offered, unprompted, when Ux asked mostly to have something tea. Oh, right on the form, whether there had been any other incidents in the past standard year. The bear, Ux said, in the flat tone of someone bracing for impact. Black bear, got into the Halloran place through a window they'd left cracked for the cat, ate about 4 pounds of ground beef and half a birthday cake before anybody noticed. I walked in, rolled up a newspaper and told it, "Buddy, you gotta go," and it went out the way it came in. You entered an enclosed structure containing an active apex predator, alone, carrying nothing but a paper implement. The newspaper's mostly for the noise. Bears don't love a loud crinkle. Ux's plating strobed orange-red-orange in a pattern the observation booth would later flag in their incident log as sustained distress cycling. You understand what you're describing is, on every conquered world with a comparable predator class, a statistical impossibility. Warden training for a single Class 6 terrestrial apex predator engagement requires 4 cycles of preparation, tactical armor rated to 1,100 newtons of bite force, and a support team of no fewer than 3. You are describing entering its territory alone, using a newspaper asterisk. I mean, it's not my territory, technically, it was the Halloran's kitchen. That is not the part I am struggling with, human Deakins. Carol's fine. That is not the part I am struggling with, Carol. He asked because he had to, because the form had a section for it, and because some deeply unwise part of him wanted to know whether there was anything else. There was the rattlesnake den under the Ferris back porch, 13 individuals, cleared by hand over the course of an afternoon, no bites, though one of them got a little fresh with my boot. There was the coyote that had wandered into a strip mall parking lot during a 4th of July fireworks show and needed walking slowly, past 200 panicking humans, back to the tree line. Mostly it just wanted the noise to stop, same as everybody. There was the raccoon in the church attic that had, by Carol's own admission, bitten her once. But that was fair, I startled it, that one's on me. Each story landed on Ux's plating like a physical blow. Each time, his color spiked. Each time, Carol delivered the follow-up in the same unbothered register a person might use to describe a minor scheduling conflict. And each time, Ux heard himself repeating some version of the same sentence, because it was the only sentence his training had prepared him to say in a room like this. You understand what you are describing is a violation of every documented Apex class safety protocol in the Concord registry. And every time, Carol just shrugged and said some version of the same thing back. It's really not that big a deal once you know what they want. It was the cougar that finally made Ux set down his stylus entirely. There was a mountain lion, too. Younger one, maybe 2 years old, got its back leg caught up in some old chain link out behind the elementary school. Carol said it plainly, the way she said everything, though for the first time in the interview her voice softened just slightly at the memory. Mama Cat wasn't far off, and she did not love me being anywhere near her kid. Kept low-charging me 3, maybe 4 mock runs, ears flat, that hiss they do, and I just planted my feet, made myself big and slow, and talked to her the whole time. Told her I wasn't going to hurt her baby, I was going to get him loose and go. Took about 20 minutes to cut him free with the fencing tool. She never made contact. Just wanted me to know she meant business, and I wanted her to know I heard her. You stood your ground, Uck said slowly, against a charging apex predator defending offspring, using asterisk language. Well toned, mostly. She doesn't speak English. Carol allowed herself a small smile. But everybody understands I'm not here to hurt your kid if you say it slow enough and you mean it. Ux's mandibles clicked in a long, uneven stutter, and his plating cycled through a shade of orange the observation booth staff hadn't logged before that shift. You understand what you are describing is, on Veron Prime, a documented Class 9 maternal defense engagement, the single most lethal predator behavior pattern in the Concord registry, responsible for more warden fatalities than any other trigger condition we track. You stood there. Mostly I just didn't run, Carol said. Running's what gets people hurt. They read it as asterisk prey, and then it's a whole different conversation. Ux was still absorbing that when Carol, entirely unprompted, mentioned the trip to Australia. Oh, and there was the one on vacation, though that one wasn't technically work. She said it almost as an afterthought, reaching for a coffee cup that was already empty. Went to visit my sister-in-law outside Darwin, and there was a saltwater croc, a big one, 14 feet, hauled out on the beach where a bunch of kids were playing, maybe 30 yards off. Nobody local seemed to be doing anything about it fast enough, so I grabbed a beach umbrella and a pool noodle out of somebody's cabana and just sort of walked it back down toward the water, nice and slow, tapping the noodle on the sand so it knew where I was. The alcove went very quiet. A asterisk saltwater crocodile, Uck said, each word arriving separately like he was setting down something heavy. The species with the strongest recorded bite force of any living animal on your world, on a asterisk beach, on asterisk vacation, with a pool noodle. And an umbrella, Carol said. I want the umbrella on the record. It did most of the actual work. You understand what you are describing, Uck said, and his voice had gone very quiet, very careful, the tone of a being choosing each word like it might detonate, is not a work incident. It is not covered by your professional training, your equipment allowance, or any protocol whatsoever. You did this recreationally, while on holiday. I mean, somebody had to. The kids were right there. By the 4th incident, Ux had stopped writing on the intake form entirely, because his hand was shaking too hard to hold the stylus steady, and he had instead activated the alert code that summoned a statistical attaché, which was, on Latch Station Kel-9, the equivalent of calling for backup you weren't entirely sure existed for a situation like this one. The compliance analysis chamber asterisk 1 level down from processing alcove 7 was where the thome worked, and it smelled, faintly and not unpleasantly, of wet moss and ozone. A thome's chosen atmosphere, humid enough to keep their membrane skin from drying and cracking under station lighting. Statistical attaché Coric Fen was mid-height for her species, her body a column of pale, faintly luminous fungal tissue wrapped in vine-like tendrils that moved independently of each other, currently swaying in the low, relaxed rhythm of someone doing routine actuarial work. That rhythm stopped the moment Ux transmitted the incident log. Say that number again, Coric said, her vines going rigid, snapping straight all at once like cables pulled taut. 4 incidents, 1 saurian, 1 terrestrial ursine, 1 venomous colonial reptile engagement involving 13 individual specimens, and 1 canid pack encounter conducted during a high-stress acoustic event. Ux's voice, transmitted over the comm, still had a faint tremor in it. All conducted without lethal force, all conducted without tactical armament, all conducted at HFY by a single unarmored civilian. Coric's membrane, normally a translucent, faintly green-gold, began clouding over with a milky opacity, the physiological tell of a thome running numbers faster than her processing tissue was comfortable with. "Do you understand what you're describing?" she said slowly. "Is statistically 4 separate fatal encounters that did not happen." "I am aware, Attaché. That is why I called you." Coric released a small burst of pale spores from the base of her crown, an involuntary stress response, the thome equivalent of a gasp, and pulled up the registry projection in the center of the chamber, a holographic column of data that hung in the moss-scented air like a verdict. Concord-wide, average survival rate for an untrained, unarmored civilian in unplanned direct contact with a single apex class 6 through 9 predator is *4%, she said. 4. Trained wardens using full tactical armament average 61% survival across a single engagement, and that number drops with every subsequent engagement in the same rotation, because fatigue and injury compound. This woman is describing 5 separate engagements, including 1 maternal defense scenario and 1 recreational, off-duty engagement, with a species carrying the highest recorded bite force on her world, all unarmored, all in under a standard year, with a survival rate of her vines twitched, calculating 100%. And she did not report a single one of them as noteworthy until asked directly on an intake form. "There is more," Uck said, and something in his voice made Coric's vines go rigid all over again. "I asked her before summoning you whether this year was typical." "And?" She laughed. Coric's crown released a second, smaller spore bloom, this one drifting up rather than bursting, which for a thome was the equivalent of a held breath finally let go. "Pull the medical file," she said. "I want to see what an unarmored civilian's regeneration record looks like after 5 apex engagements in a single cycle. There should be scarring. There should be * something." There was, as it turned out, almost nothing. A note about a childhood appendectomy, an allergy to a plant called ragweed, and a single line, flagged for its own strangeness. "Reading patient describes hobby as guard. Inning mostly. No chronic injury on file." Coric read it twice out loud to make sure she hadn't mistranslated it. "She does this," Coric said, "for a living, and her medical file reads like someone who has never left her own home." "She has, by her own account, left her home 4,800 times to walk directly at something that could kill her," Uck said. "I am beginning to suspect those 2 facts are related." Coric insisted on being present for the rest of the interview, which was how the 3 of them ended up back in processing alcove 7, Uck's at his usual seat, Coric hovering at the edge of the table with her vines coiled tight, in a posture the observation booth staff would later describe, in their incident report, as *braced*, and Carol Deakins finishing the last of her now cold coffee like this was, in fact, still just a Tuesday. "Human Deakins," Coric began, her voice carrying the careful, over-enunciated precision of someone determined not to let her disbelief show and failing almost immediately. "I am a statistical attaché with the Apex Compliance Division. I have reviewed your declared incidents. Before I ask you the question I actually came here to ask, I want to understand something. The maternal defense engagement, the cougar. Do you have any sense of how many Concord wardens die, responding to that exact behavior pattern every cycle?" "Couldn't guess," Carol said honestly. 206, averaged across the last standard decade. It is the single leading cause of warden mortality in this division, ahead of hostile boarding actions, ahead of containment breaches, ahead of everything. A defending mother is, statistically, the most dangerous configuration any apex predator can be in. Coric's vines had gone taut again, coiled close to her body. "You understand what you are describing. When you say you simply stood there, is the exact scenario our own trained personnel are least likely to survive." "I believe you," Carol said. "But she wasn't trying to kill me. She was trying to move me. There's a difference, and once you've seen it enough times, you start being able to tell which one you're looking at. And if you had been wrong, then I'd have gotten hurt, and it still would have been fair because I'd have been standing somewhere I had no business standing. Carol shrugged. But I wasn't wrong. I'm not usually wrong about that particular thing. It's sort of the whole job. Corrick looked at Ux. Ux looked at Corrick. Neither of them had a follow-up question that didn't sound absurd out loud, so Corrick moved on to the one she'd actually come to ask. I would like to ask you directly. Over the full span of your career, how many individual Apex-class engagements have you personally conducted? Carol thought about it for a second, the way a person thinks about how many times they've driven to the grocery store. Gosh, I've been doing this 22 years. Some weeks it's nothing, some weeks it's 3 calls a day during storm season when everything gets flooded out of its den. She did some quiet math out loud, counting on her fingers, the least dramatic gesture Ux had ever seen a being make in this chamber. Probably somewhere around 4,800. Might be closer to 5,000 at this point. I stopped keeping an exact tally after year 10. The room went very, very quiet. Corrick's membrane clouded over completely, a full milky white from crown to base, and her vines snapped so rigid that one of them audibly cracked against the table edge. 4,800, she repeated, in a voice that had lost all of its careful enunciation. Individual engagements. Give or take. And your fatality rate across those engagements. 0, Carol said. I've got some scars. 3 stitches one time, a possum got me good behind the ear. Bad case of poison ivy from a job that had nothing to do with the actual animal. But 0 fatalities if that's what you're asking. Corrick turned to Ux. Ux turned to Corrick. Neither of them said anything for 11 full seconds, which the observation booth timestamped precisely, because 11 seconds of silence between a Warden Prime and a statistical attaché was, itself, an anomaly worth logging. Run the number, Ux said finally. Corrick's vines trembled as she projected the calculation into the air above the table. A long, cascading equation, Concord actuarial notation, stacking line over line, ending in a single figure that hung there glowing, stark and enormous, while the 3 of them looked at it in 3 very different states of composure. At the Concord standard 4% unarmored civilian survival rate per engagement, Corrick said, her voice gone flat and mechanical in the specific way of someone reciting a number she does not fully believe. The statistical probability of a single individual surviving * 4,800 consecutive unarmored apex engagements * is calculated at less than 1 in 10 to the 281st power. She let that sit in the air for a moment. There is no number large enough in the Concord registry to properly express how many times this woman should be dead. If she had been a warden, using standard tactical protocol, cumulative fatigue, and injury probability, places her expected point of death somewhere around the *4th incident. She has had this conversation with us roughly * 1,100 times over since then, and simply did not think it was worth mentioning. Ux's plating had gone a color it had never gone before, not once in 412 intake procedures, a pale, washed-out shade that his own species didn't have a formal name for, because it wasn't a color V'Horan physiology produced under fear. It was the color they produced under something closer to awe. Carol, he said, and it was the first time he'd used her given name without prompting. You understand what you are describing is not merely a violation of protocol. It is a statistical impossibility on a scale this station has never processed. Carol set her empty coffee cup down on the table, folded her hands, and looked at the 2 of them, the orange and pale Warden Prime and the trembling, cloud-membraned analyst, with the same patient, unbothered expression she'd worn since she walked in. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Every single one of those animals, every gator, every bear, every snake, it wasn't trying to kill me. Not really. It was protecting its den, or its kids, or its next meal, or it was just scared and cornered and didn't have anywhere else to put that fear except its teeth. That's not so different from people if you think about it. You don't fight that kind of scared. You just let it know real calm that you're not the thing it needs to be afraid of, and you mean it. All the way down, and most of the time it believes you. Nobody in the room said anything for a long moment. Most of the time, Ux repeated quietly. Most of the time, Carol agreed. That's why I carry snacks. Warden Prime Ux's command alcove ***, one deck up, overlooking the containment ring where the Quarmoth had been resettled that morning, was where the paperwork finally caught up to the day. Ux stood at the viewport with his plating a settled, contemplative blue for the first time since the shift began. Coric's projection still hovering nearby with the impossible number glowing faintly at its center, and a formal directive drafting itself on the console between them. I am amending the intake protocol, Ux said, mostly to Coric, mostly to himself. Effective immediately, all human civilian personnel processed through Concord Customs are to be flagged as *unregistered Apex-class handlers pending further study, regardless of stated occupation. No physical challenge is to be offered. No display of dominance is to be attempted. Wardens are advised that human civilians of unremarkable appearance have demonstrated, he paused, searching for the right term, and settled on the only one that fit, catastrophic competence. You're going to want a new registry category, Coric said, still faintly cloud-membraned, still recalibrating. There isn't a biothreat class for a species that survives apex encounters by being polite to them. There is now, Ux said, and keyed the entry himself, watching a fresh line append itself to the Concord's 11,000 cycle registry. Class designation Omega Human. Threat profile. Negligible until provoked, then catastrophically, calmly, unstoppably competent. Recommended protocol: do not startle. Do not challenge. Allow to finish sentence. When they called Carol back in to inform her of the station's decision, a formal offer, drafted with more ceremony than Latch Station Kel-9 had extended to anyone in Ux's tenure, granting her a provisional Concord Apex Handler license, unlimited class, and a standing invitation to consult on any future Concord protocol involving unregistered dangerous fauna. Carol listened politely, thanked them, and asked, with the same easy smile she'd had since the atrium, whether the license came with parking. I don't actually need it for anything, she added when Ux looked briefly, silently devastated by the question. I've got a job back home, but it's real nice of you to offer. I'll frame the certificate. The transit dock *20 minutes later, was quiet in the particular way of a station catching its breath after an unusually eventful shift. Carol Deakins walked toward her outbound shuttle with a fresh cup of coffee from the concourse kiosk, cardigan slightly rumpled, sensible shoes still faintly muddy from a Job 3 Systems and one Tuesday ago, checking her wrist calm with the mild, distracted focus of a woman who had somewhere else to be. Got a bobcat stuck in somebody's dryer vent waiting on me when I land, she said to no one in particular, to Ux, who had walked her down out of what he would later describe to Coric as professional curiosity, and also I could not stop myself. Homeowner already called twice. People panic. You are not concerned, Ux said, about the bobcat. Nah, they're mostly just embarrassed once you get them out. Little guy's probably more scared of the dryer than of me. She stepped up to the shuttle ramp, gave Ux a small, easy wave, the kind you'd give a neighbor, not the being who had, 90 minutes earlier, created an entirely new biothreat classification in her honor. You take care of that Quarmoth now, sounded like a rough morning. The shuttle doors closed behind her before Ux could figure out how she knew about the Quarmoth at all. He stood on the dock a long while after her transport had cleared the ring, plating settled to its calm working blue, and finally keyed a closing note into the station's official incident log. The last line of a report that would, within the cycle, be forwarded to every Concord checkpoint bordering human space, stamped, filed, and quietly ignored by exactly no one who read it twice. Addendum to Apex Compliance Directive 7.1, Latch Station Kel-9. Species Homo sapiens confirmed capable of unarmored, non-lethal engagement with confirmed apex class fauna at a survival rate statistically indistinguishable from total invulnerability. Cause remains unconfirmed. Leading theory, per subject's own testimony. They ask nicely, and they mean it. Recommend all future human civilian declarations be taken at face value, however unlikely. Recommend additionally that no one ask this species which of our registered predators taste best. She was not joking. We checked. She had a recipe.